John Smith, 3535 Papineau Avenue, 522-1106. John Smith, 534 LeClaire, 680-9746. John Smith, 422 Rivard, 842-6420. John Smith, 2040 Sicard, 223-2007. You may be thinking to yourself, this is boring. And yes, reading the phone book can be incredibly boring. Reading any list is boring. If reading lists are boring, then the question you have to ask is a question for Parshat Maasei. Because Parshat Maasei begins with a very long list. It begins with the list of the 42 campings that the Jews do in the desert. And let me give you a sample of it. And the Jews traveled from Chatzerot, and they camped in Ritma. And they traveled from Ritma, and they camped in Rimon Paretz. And they traveled from Rimon Paretz, and they camped in Livna. And they traveled from Livna, and they camped in Risa. And they traveled from Risa, and they camped in Kehelata. And they traveled from Kehelata, and they camped in Har Shafer, etc., etc., etc. This list at the beginning of Parshat Maasei is boring. And we have to wonder why the Torah would include a list of 42 campings that don't seem to have any meaning. Why would the Torah include this list of 42 campings that is not interesting and not inspiring and not insightful? And this is, of course, a question that many commentaries have asked. And I think the answer, and this is perhaps the answer that many of the other commentaries give as well, is that these 42 campings are included to teach us about the hidden side of history. And actually, to be more precise, these 42 campings are included to pay tribute to the hidden side of history. Now, for most people, when we think about history, we think about the dramatic and catastrophic. We think about great men and women and about great events. We don't think about the small and the average and the day-to-day. That doesn't figure in our vision of history because, truth be told, history is about drama. It is about what is exciting, what is larger than life, what seems to overwhelm us. And this may be what we write history about, but in actuality, most of life is about the little things, and most of history is about the little things. It's about the things that happen on a consistent basis, the day-to-day quotidian actions that actually can transform and make a difference in the lives of individuals and in the lives of nations. And actually, these small actions, when they accumulate, can actually transform history. And this is what most of history is about. And although this particular list in Parshat Maasei may be ostensibly a very boring list, what it is telling us is that for 42 campings in the desert, the Jews held their faith, and God provided for the Jews. It may have been consistent, it may have been unremarkable, but it is that hidden side of history which allowed the Jews to grow and become the nation they needed to become. And so this is a boring list, 42 stops. But the boring list of 42 stops pays tribute to the little actions that were occurring all along the way. And you have to think about this in terms of life as well, not just in history. Of course, in history, there are multiple events that are small, that are not recorded, that make a big difference in history. As an example, let's say the Israel of the 1950s. Israel in the 1950s, it had one war, but they had no major triumphs, no major crises. Israel in the 1950s, although it was rather fragile, was able to move day by day and can continue to do its work. And it slowly grew into a nation during that period of time. And it was the small, consistent things, the fact that the people living there didn't mind, whether it be the attacks by the Fayadin, whether it be the rationing, whether it be the economic problems, they stood their ground, and that allowed the nation to blossom. And while this is true of large events in history, it's very true of the small things that happen in life as well. You know, we think about a parent's relationship with a child, and sometimes the things that we focus on are the family vacations that may have been exceptional. It may be sending the child to camp, or sending them off to university, or making their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah or wedding. But in actuality, you know what the most important part of parenting a child is? The moment that you give your child a hug. It may be a small thing, but it's something that we do on a consistent basis. Indeed, it's something that I tell young couples, and when I look at them and I ask them, what do you think the most important moment in your marriage is going to be? Is it the wedding? Is it when you, God willing, have children? Is it the 10th anniversary, the 25th anniversary? And so different answers are given. And I always look at the couple and I say, no. The most important moment in your marriage is when you go to the grocery store and you see your spouse's favorite cereal and you make sure to include it in the grocery cart. It's the small and little consistent things, the hidden side of history, that makes the greatest difference in life. And that is what Parshat Maasei is paying tribute to. The hidden side of history, the little things that make the big differences.